What's going on, everyone, and welcome back to another Too Good for Theaters video. Today, we're going to be giving our reaction on the Patriots' initial 53-man roster, and of course, I say initial because there's going to be waiver claims and stuff like that, and the Patriots might choose to add some external talent, which means some of these guys might be demoted to the practice squad or potentially parting ways with the franchise. So let's get right into it. So starting off here with the quarterbacks, the Patriots opt to keep two QBs, that of course being Drake May as well as Joshua Dobbs. And once you saw that Woodridge got released early on in the cutdown period stage, there's really no chance of them keeping a third quarterback on this active roster. Wouldn't be surprised if they actually sign Woodridge back to the practice squad, or maybe they seek an external QB, maybe like a Tommy DeVito through the waiver wire or something like that. But overall, I think that for the majority of the season, they're not going to have a third quarterback on the active roster. However, I do think that they're going to have some QBs on the practice squad, given the fact that the offensive line is a little skeptical right now, as well as Drake May has been prone to take some hits and even missed some time last year with a concussion. So I think it's fair to say that the Patriots will keep a third quarterback on the practice squad, and pending the health of the QB room, you might see some elevations from time to time. Moving on to the running back position here, the Patriots opt to keep three backs, that of course being Ramondre Stevenson, Antonio Gibson, and Travion Henderson. I would say of this group, I'm probably the most confident in this offensive position group of maybe even any on the team, just given the fact that I really like every role that all three of these backs can really bring to this team. I expect Ramondre Stevenson to probably lead this team in carries and maybe be the leading rusher. However, I do think that Travion Henderson, just given the fact of his versatility in the receiving game, his pass protection, and that the Patriots are comfortable with running him to the outside and the inside, I wouldn't be surprised if Travion Henderson actually leads this group in terms of total snaps on the field. And I'm very confident in Antonio Gibson just playing that kind of scat back role, get some carries to really spell these backs every now and again. But like I said before, I'm extremely confident with this group. And I'm not going to lie, it is really because of Travion Henderson. He's just showed so much in the preseason, whether it's versatility in the receiving game and pass protection, or the ability that the Patriots run him to the inside and the outside. I really do think that he can have an absolute great rookie season, maybe even be considered in the offensive rookie of the year if everything goes out well. So I'm very excited about this position group. However, in terms of the actual number of backs on this team, I wouldn't be surprised if the Patriots do look into acquiring a fullback, and I have one in mind in particular. Of course, former Patriot Jakob Johnson was actually released by the Texans, so I would not be surprised whatsoever if Josh McDaniels kind of makes a plea to Mike Vrabel in the front office and tries to acquire a true fullback on this team, because we know how much Josh McDaniels likes to utilize the fullbacks in this scheme. So it would not surprise me whatsoever if the Patriots do try to add a fullback. And in particular, a guy I would recommend is Jakob Johnson, just because of his scheme fit as well as his familiarity with the playbook and the role that he would play here in New England. Moving on to the offensive line, the Patriots opt to keep 9 offensive linemen. That, of course, being Will Campbell, Jared Wilson, Garrett Bradbury, Mike Onwenu, Morgan Moses, Ben Brown, Marcus Bryant, Kaden Wallace, and Vidarian Lowe. Not surprising whatsoever, given the fact that there's a lot of uncertainty along the offensive line, especially in the interior. We don't even know really who's the starting left guard quite yet. I would assume it's probably going to be Jared Wilson, given the fact that he took the majority of the reps during the preseason as well as during training camp and stuff like that. However, Ben Brown did actually finish the final preseason game at the left guard position, I believe. So that's certainly something. But either way, those guys are going to be either your starting left guard or your backup center / left guard there amongst the interior. And I think a guy like Kaden Wallace really made this roster because of his versatility, that being he could play tackle or guard. However, I do think that the Patriots are going to try and use him at the guard position. But even though he did make this roster, it is really sad to really look at that 2024 draft class thus far and really see how much of a impact they have really had on this team outside of Drake May. And I'm going to talk about that a little later in this video here. But it is just not good. However, Kaden Wallace does end up making this roster. And guys like Vidarian Lowe and Marcus Bryant, they're probably going to be your depth at the tackle position. I think Marcus Bryant really established himself as your swing tackle, your backup left tackle, and right tackle if something were to happen to Morgan Moses or Will Campbell. But overall, I think that the starting offensive line is probably going to be Will Campbell, Jared Wilson, Garrett Bradbury, Mike Onwenu, and Morgan Moses. And I understand some of the skepticism with Morgan Moses, given the fact that the Patriots have had to load manage him and given the fact that he has had some injury history. However, I kind of see it as a win-win. You get Morgan Moses more fresh for when football actually matters, which is the regular season, and you get guys like Vidarian Lowe and Marcus Bryant more and more reps because you're going to need those guys, given the fact that Morgan Moses has been injured several times throughout these past couple years. So you can't really defend the signing. However, I do think that they're really handling the situation as best as they can. And as long as Morgan Moses goes out there and plays well, I don't think that there's going to be any issue with this load management. And looking at this offensive line group in general, I don't think that the Patriots are really going to be looking for external players to add to this team. And given the fact that I really don't think that the league is looking to really get rid of any linemen, at this point, if you have linemen on your team, you're not going to be willing to part with them. I understand that Cam Robinson actually just got released. However, from his perspective, why on earth would you ever sign with New England? You're probably not signing here to start as a tackle because you have Morgan Moses and Will Campbell. So are you really going to sign with the Patriots to be a swing tackle here? Probably not. If I were him, would try and sign with a team where I can compete for a starting spot, or if there's just blatantly an open tackle spot on any roster. But overall, I think this is the group you're going to have amongst the offensive line, and Doug Marrone is probably going to have his work cut out for him this season. And you really do have to pray for good health amongst the offensive line because the Patriots don't necessarily have a ton of depth at any of the positions. So moving on to the tight end position here, the Patriots opt to keep three. That, of course, being Hunter Henry, Austin Hooper, and Jack Westover. I think your core two are going to be Hunter Henry and Austin Hooper. And I do think that the Patriots are going to have some better depth at the position. I think that Jack Westover probably made this roster because of his ability to somewhat play a little bit of fullback. However, with the injury history of Austin Hooper and Hunter Henry, I think it's a necessity to have better depth at the position, whether they choose to look into some external talent or if they decide to keep multiple practice squad tight ends. I think it's a necessity given the fact that Josh McDaniels does have a high usage rate for his tight ends, so there's going to be a lot of action on the field. And at times, there's going to be times where these guys probably get nicked up, and if they don't have good depth at the position, that kind of changes his offense around a little bit, given the fact that the tight ends are going to be used very heavily in this scheme. Moving on to the wide receiver position here, the Patriots opt to keep 8 wide receivers, that including Stephon Diggs, Kayshon Boutte, Demario Douglas, Matt Collins, Kyle Williams, Kendrick Bourne, Efton Chisholm, and Javon Baker, which I'm not going to lie, I'm a little surprised that Kendrick Bourne and Javon Baker both made this roster, given the fact that we really haven't seen a ton of Kendrick Bourne, and that Javon Baker really hasn't produced much on the offensive end here. However, it looks like they're going to be relying on him a lot in special teams, and they really liked what he did there on special teams. So that special team coverage really helped him seal a spot on this roster. But I think your top 4, of course, are going to be Stephon Diggs, Kayshon Boutte, Demario Douglas, and Matt Collins. And we haven't seen a ton of Stephon Diggs here, so it's going to be interesting to see how he really fits into this Patriots offense, and I'm really excited to really see if he's looking 100% in week 1 and ready to go, because if he is, he's certainly going to be a difference maker for this team. And of the wide receiver position, I would probably expect Demario Douglas to be the most highest targeted wide receiver just because of how he is used in this system. Josh McDaniels relies heavily on these slot receivers, and given the fact that Demario Douglas is pretty solid in carving out space for himself against man and zone, whether it's using his speed, his craftiness, or his quickness, or just being able to stop in the soft spots of the zone, I think that he's going to get a ton of targets this year. And I think he's probably going to be the most productive wide receiver of the group, which is not really a shock because he really has shown a lot of potential ever since he stepped on the field. And I'm really excited to see if he can kind of take that year 3 leap here and really kind of hone in his craft. But, of course, you got guys like Kyle Williams on this team as well, kind of playing that little speedster threat. Really reminds me of Philip Dorsett in this offense. Hopefully, You can get Kyle Williams more involved because of just him being a better overall player than Philip Dorsett. But at the minimum, I think that's the position he's going to be able to really kind of key into, being that speed outside receiving type threat. And of course, you have Efton Chisholm there, who really had a great preseason. He definitely earned a spot on this roster. I really do see him more so being kind of depth. And unfortunately for him, probably the most talented, maybe not talented wide receiver, but the most targeted wide receiver, or someone who really is the mainstay of this receiving core, Demario Douglas, is in the position that he needs to play. Them, of course, being both extremely small slot receivers. So we might not see a ton of Efton Chisholm to begin with. However, with them both being pretty small, there's a chance that Demario Douglas does get nicked up at some point, and maybe we do see a little bit of Efton Chisholm. Or if the Patriots opt to use 4 wide receivers, maybe you decide to keep a guy like Efton Chisholm and Demario Douglas both on the field in some short yardage situations to really help separate against man coverage. And before, I was kind of talking about the lack of depth at tight end. Well, I think a solution to that might be Mack Hollins, given the fact that he is a big physical wide receiver and can play inside on the run games. Maybe you opt to use him at tight end at times as well to really help out this offense. So I think that's a very good idea that Josh McDaniels should explore, given the fact that he does have familiarity with Mack Hollins from his time with him in Vegas. So it's going to be very interesting to see if Mack Hollins can play a little bit of tight end. And that would certainly be something I would look into if I was the Patriots coaching staff. So moving over to the defensive linemen, the Patriots opt to keep 6. That, of course, being Milton Williams, Christian Barmore, Khyiris Tonga, Keon White, Joshua Farmer, and Jeremiah Farms. No real surprises here. Of course, Christian Barmore and Milton Williams are probably going to be your main 2 pass rushing threats from the interior. You're going to have Keon White playing on the edge. Khyiris Tonga probably playing on early downs for run support. Same with Jeremiah Farms, kind of that depth option behind Tonga. And it's going to be really interesting to see how they incorporate rookie Farmer into the mix. I would expect to have him more so in on passing downs. However, I have been impressed with his run support in the preseason at times. So I do think that it's going to be difficult for him to really carve out a big-time role on this defense year 1. If we see some snaps every now and again, though, I think that's a good sign that he's showing progression. But I would say that I expect this defensive line to struggle a little bit in run support. However, I do believe with Christian Barmore and Milton Williams really playing on the interior, that this team is going to have the ability to get a ton of interior pressure. Because as we saw with Milton Williams in Philadelphia, he was a force just kind of getting interior pressure. And of course, he did play alongside other great defensive linemen, but that's what Christian Barmore is too. And before last year, Christian Barmore, towards the end of the 2023 season, really came on. Of course, I remember that 3-sack game against the Broncos. But just those 2 in general, I'm very high on, because I really do think that they can form a great dynamic interior pass rush duo. And I really hope that that is the case, because if this Patriots defense is going to succeed, they're going to have to get pressure on the quarterback, and they're going to have to be successful in stuffing the run, because I feel very comfortable with the back end of this defense. And my one question mark truly is how they're going to be kind of competing against the run, and if they're able to get more pressures on the quarterback compared to last year, where I believe they were actually last in the league in getting sacks. So this defensive line is going to have to come to play this season if this Patriots defense has any chance of success. Moving on to the backers here, the Patriots opt to keep 8 linebackers, that including Harold Landry, Kayvon Chason, Anthony Jennings, Elijah Ponder, and more of the traditional linebackers, Robert Spillane, Christian Ellis, Jack Gibbons, and Marte Mapu, they actually have listed as a linebacker. So that's going to be very interesting to see what happens there. And of course, Jelani Tavai is technically available to return from IR, so we'll see where he fits into this mix. But overall, I think that this is a solid group. I kind of have them ranked a little differently based off whether they're going to be edge linebackers or traditional linebackers. And Harold Landry is going to be the key to this unit, because he's going to be in charge of getting to the quarterback the most, as well as Kayvon Chason, who had a really good training camp. So I'm expecting high things from both those guys. And if they're able to produce along with the pressure I'm hoping to get from the interior of the offense or the defensive line, this team's pass rush is going to be very successful. Of course, you have Anthony Jennings, who is more so a traditional early down player, very similar to Keon White, kind of setting the edge. But I was excited to see Anthony Jennings make this team because, of course, there was trade rumors and stuff like that. And once the Patriots couldn't get anything back for them, I was a little concerned that they straight up might just release him because he's not actively a real scheme fit for this team. However, he's too talented to just straight up be released. So for them to find a spot on this roster for him is going to be very key, I think. In early down run stops, setting the edge really is his role. And even at times during the preseason, he showed the ability to get to the quarterback. So maybe he does receive a little bit more playing time there. And Elijah Ponder, undrafted rookie, just doing a good job making this roster. They've spoken very highly of him. I think that he's going to be able to help in the run support game. But looking at the linebackers, Robert Spillane, he really has been everywhere during this preseason. I expect him to kind of continue that in the regular season. I do think that he is actually the defensive captain of this team. So expecting a lot from him from a communication standpoint. And for him to really set the edge and set the tempo for this defense for them to be successful. Of course, you have depth options with Jack Gibbons and Marte Mapu. I expect Marte Mapu and Jack Gibbons to kind of both be coverage linebackers, which is very nice in this scheme, as well as Christian Ellis. I think is just going to kind of translate his role last year, taking a bigger step into this team's defense. Hopefully he's able to kind of carry that over into this new regime and still be a productive linebacker under the Vrabel administration. So moving on to the corner position here, the Patriots opt to bring 5 cornerbacks onto this 53-man roster. That, of course, being Christian Gonzalez, Carlton Davis, Alex Austin, Marcus Jones, and DJ James. This is a good sign that Christian Gonzalez should be prepared to go for week 1, as well as Carlton Davis. Of course, most of them, or both of them, have missed the majority of training camp in these preseason games, but I expect both of them to be healthy and ready to go for the start of the regular season. Of course, Marcus Jones is going to be your primary slot corner here. Alex Austin's going to be that 4th corner, probably that guy on the outside. And DJ James, after having some really good preseason games and stood out in training camp, does a nice job making this roster. He's versatile on the back end. You can play him outside, inside, but he does have his work cut out for him if he wants to see some more playing time, especially with this cornerback unit. But I feel very comfortable with the corners on this team, and I think it's probably the strongest defensive position group in terms of talent, and I think that Terrell Williams is going to have a blast just playing a ton of man coverage with this team because Christian Gonzalez and Carlton Davis are both pretty locked down corners in man coverage. Of course, there's the stat that Carlton Davis and Christian Gonzalez, I believe, both allowed under 50% in terms of completion percentage in man coverage. So very excited to see that. Marcus Jones probably is going to be the key for the cornerback room. I think that he's a very successful slot corner. However, I think there are times when he's going up against elite slot wide receivers, especially like Jackson Smith and Jigba of last year, where he was getting exposed a little bit. And it's really going to be crucial, I think, for the Patriots to monitor his workload if they do have him returning punts like I expect him to do. But overall, I feel very comfortable in this unit. They have a good depth. There's probably some practice squad options that they could have too if some injuries do take place. But having guys like Alex Austin and DJ James as back-end depth is very good because Alex Austin has shown at times that he's capable of being a starting corner, let alone being your 4th corner and your 3rd outside corner. That is very crucial to this team and just having good depth at the position. And, of course, having a training camp standout like DJ James, who hopefully continues to progress, is only going to help this secondary even more. So wrapping up the back end here, the Patriots opt to keep 5 safeties, that of course being Jabril Peppers, Jalen Hawkins, rookie Craig Woodson, Kyle Duggar, as well as Del Pettis. And the biggest question of this group was whether or not Kyle Duggar was going to make this roster. And very similar to Anthony Jennings, Patriots looked like they couldn't really get anything in return for him, or at least have teams take on his contract. But he's simply just too talented to be let go and released. So even if he's playing with the 2nd unit, having a capable starting safety in your 2nd unit certainly is not a terrible thing. However, I would not be surprised if the Patriots do look to continue and trying to offload him this season. However, maybe a position change is in need. Maybe you could do the same thing with Kyle Duggar that you have done with Marte Mapu and move him more so to a coverage linebacker because he frankly just does not have the same athleticism as he has when he first entered the league. However, I think he could still hold up in guarding tight ends and maybe backs out of the backfield. So maybe that might be a way to get him more playing time on this defense. However, I think your starting 3 safeties are probably going to be Jabril Peppers, Jalen Hawkins, and Craig Woodson. And from what we've seen in the preseason, they're very comfortable with having three safeties on the field at the same time. So that's certainly going to be something to monitor. However, Jalen Hawkins has had himself a very good training camp, as has Craig Woodson. So it's very exciting to see those two players continue to play well. Jabril Peppers really has been a vocal leader of this defense these past couple years. And his absence last year at times was certainly missed. So hopefully he's kind of able to regain that 2023 form that he had, because he played very well under the last year of the Belichick regime. And of course, Del Pettis, he really just has stayed in this mix here. I think he had a very good preseason. He's a big hitter, but I do think that he's probably going to get the majority of his work in on special teams, whether it's punt coverage or kickoff coverage. However, if there are some injuries in the safety department, I can see some ability for him to take some defensive snaps like he did towards the back end of last year. But I think for the majority of this season, Del Pettis is really going to have to keep this roster spot through special teams. But speaking of special teams here, the Patriots opt to keep 4 special team specialists. That includes Andres Borregales, the kicker out of Miami, punter Bryce Behringer, long snapper Julian Ashby, and of course, coverage specialist Brendan Schooler. And really the only question mark was who was going to be the kicker on this team, Andres Borregales or Parker Romo. And personally, I thought that Parker Romo actually had a better preseason. However, when a team actually invests an NFL draft pick into a kicker, they're most likely going to be making this team here. So it's interesting to see that Andres Borregales did make this team. My only concern is whether or not he's going to be adept to dealing with the wind in Gillette Stadium. Of course, he was kicking in Miami where he had a ton of success. However, it is very different to kick from Miami to New England, especially in Gillette Stadium during some of the cold seasons. So we're going to have to see how he adapts to that. And maybe you do keep a kicker on the practice squad just in case Andres Borregales simply just does not cut it. But like I said before, no true shocks here from the special teams category. And hopefully the Patriots are going to be able to continue how well they played during the preseason on special teams into the regular season, because I'm sure Jeffrey Springs, special teams coach, the only coach that actually translated from last year, is going to be very happy at keeping that model at a consistent level. All right, everyone, that's going to wrap up my reactions to the Patriots 53-man roster. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And the next time I actually talk to you about the Patriots, it's going to be because of real football, barring any major moves here. So hopefully I'll check you all out in the next one.